this story, a pregnant woman loses her mother just before giving birth. Her mother-in-law arrives to help with the traditional 8-week visit or mugwar, but behind closed doors, she manipulates her son, turning him against his wife, and refuses to leave. Until one unexpected visitor arrives and everything changes. Morning in Lagos never arrives quietly. Before the sun even stretches over the rooftops, the city is already awake. Buses honk impatiently along crowded roads. Hawkers weave between cars, calling out the prices of oranges and roasted corn. Somewhere in the distance, a generator coughs to life, joining the endless chorus of Lagos noise. Inside a modest apartment on the 3rd floor of a cream-colored building in Surulere, however, the morning feels peaceful. Tommy stands by the small kitchen window, stirring a pot of oatmeal slowly. The smell of cinnamon fills the room. One hand rests gently on her growing stomach. 6 months pregnant, she smiles to herself. From the bedroom, her husband Emeka appears, still half-dressed for work, struggling to knot his tie. "Tony," he calls, "this tie is fighting me again." Tony laughs softly and walks toward him. "Let me see," she says, taking the tie from his hands. With quick, practiced fingers, she fixes the knot neatly under his collar. "You see?" she says, stepping back. "Now you look like someone that owns a company." Emeka grins. One day, he reaches down and places his palm on her stomach. "And how is my daughter this morning?" "Who told you it's a girl?" Tony asks playfully. "My instincts," he says confidently. The baby kicks lightly. Both of them freeze, then laughed. Moments like this had become their favorite part of the day. Small, quiet reminders that their lives were about to change forever. Tony walks back toward the kitchen, but before she reaches the stove, her phone begins to ring on the table. The screen lights up. "Mommy." Her face brightens instantly. She answers the call with excitement. "Mommy." On the other end, her mother's warm voice fills the room like sunlight. "My daughter, how are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, Mommy. The baby kicked again this morning." "Ah." Her mother laughs proudly. That child is already greeting the world. Tony leans against the counter as they talk. Her mother asks about the doctor's visits, about the baby clothes Tony has started buying, about whether she is eating enough vegetables. Then, just as she always does, her mother makes the same promise she has repeated for months. "When the baby comes, I will come to Lagos myself," she says firmly. "I will stay with you and teach you everything. Bathing the baby, feeding the baby, all of it." Tony smiles, comfort washing over her. "No one does omugwo like you, Mommy," her mother laughs proudly. Of course. For Tony, that promise meant everything. Because no matter how independent she tried to be, the truth was simple. She was scared. Motherhood was new territory, and the thought of going through it without guidance sometimes kept her awake at night. But whenever she remembered her mother would be there, those fears disappeared. Unfortunately, life rarely follows the plans we make. 3 weeks later, the call comes. It is late in the evening. Rain taps softly against the windows of the apartment while Tony folds baby clothes on the bed. Her phone rings. The number on the screen is unfamiliar. She answers slowly. "Hello?" A man's voice speaks carefully on the other end. "Good evening. Are you Tony?" "Yes." There is a pause. "I'm calling from the hospital." Something inside her chest tightens immediately. The words that follow feel like they belong to another reality. Her mother had collapsed earlier that afternoon. A sudden illness. Doctors tried everything, but she didn't survive. For a moment, Tony doesn't speak. She simply sits down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as the phone slips slowly from her hand. Emeka rushes into the room when he hears the sound. "What happened?" She looks up at him with empty eyes. "My mother is gone." The days that follow feel like a blur of tears, prayers, and mourning. They travel to the village for the burial. Relatives fill the compound with loud cries and sympathetic whispers. But Tony hears almost none of it. She sits quietly beside the coffin, one hand resting on her stomach. The one person who promised to guide her into motherhood was gone. That night after the burial, Tony sits alone under a mango tree behind the house. Emeka finds her there. "You shouldn't be sitting outside in this cold," he says gently. She wipes her eyes. "I just keep thinking, when the baby comes, who will help me?" Emeka kneels beside her and takes her hand. "My mother will come," he says. "She will do the omugwo for us." Tony nods slowly. She has always liked his mother. Mama Udo was warm during visits, always hugging her tightly and introducing her proudly to neighbors. "This is my daughter," she would say. Not daughter-in-law. Daughter. Remembering that kindness brings Tony a small sense of comfort. Maybe things would still be okay. 2 months later, Tomi gives birth to a healthy baby girl in a busy maternity hospital in Lagos. The moment the nurse places the tiny baby in her arms, Tomi begins to cry. "She looks like you," Emeka says softly. But Tomi shakes her head. "No, she looks like my mother." 3 days later, Mama Udo finally arrives from the village. The taxi stops outside the apartment building just after noon. Tomi stands near the balcony holding the baby while Emeka rushes downstairs to help with the luggage. When the door opens, Mama Udo enters with loud energy and big laughter. "My grandchild." She stretches her arms wide and hugs Tomi warmly before carefully taking the baby. "Look at this beautiful girl." For a moment, the house fills with joy again. Mama Udo prays loudly over the baby. She tells stories about Emeka as a child. She even insists on cooking pepper soup that same evening. Tomi begins to relax. Maybe everything will truly be okay. But later that night, as Emeka brings the luggage into the bedroom, Tomi notices something unusual. 4 very large travel bags sit neatly against the wall. She blinks slowly. 4 bags. For an 8-week visit. She almost asks about it. But then she shakes the thought away. Maybe village mothers simply travel with many things. She decides not to overthink it. That night, while everyone prepares for bed, Mama Udo sits on the floor opening one of the bags and carefully arranging clothes in the wardrobe. She glances around the room with quiet interest. Then she smiles to herself and says casually, Lagos life is sweet." She folds another wrapper neatly. "I may enjoy staying here small." Tomi laughs nervously. She thinks it is a joke. But something about the way Mama Udo says it makes the laughter fade quickly. The first few days after Mama Udo arrived felt like a blessing. Inside their modest apartment in Lagos, the air was filled with the comforting smells of traditional cooking. Pepper soup simmered on the stove. Fresh herbs dried near the kitchen window. The baby's soft cries blended with the gentle rhythm of everyday life. Mama Udo moved around the house like a seasoned commander of motherhood. "Bring the warm water," she would say confidently. "Not too hot. A baby's skin is delicate." She bathed the newborn carefully, her hands experienced and steady. She wrapped the child in soft cloth and rocked her gently while humming old village lullabies. Tomi watched with admiration. For the first time since her mother passed away, she felt a sense of safety. Maybe Emeka was right. Maybe everything would truly be fine. Mama Udo cooked rich soups meant to strengthen new mothers. She told stories while cutting vegetables at the dining table. "In our time," she would say proudly, "women gave birth and returned to the farm the same week." Tomi laughed politely at those stories. She thought they were simply the playful exaggerations of an older generation. But after the first week, something began to shift. It started with small comments, tiny remarks that floated into conversations like dust in sunlight. One afternoon, Tomi carefully lifted the baby from the crib. Mama Udo watched from the sofa and shook her head. Tomi paused. "What is it, Mama?" "You carry the baby too much," Mama Udo said. "The child will become spoiled." Tomi nodded respectfully. "I will try not to." But the next day, another comment came. This time in the kitchen, Tomi was slowly stirring stew while the baby slept in the bedroom. Mama Udo walked in, tasted the soup, and frowned slightly. "Young women nowadays cook with too much oil," she said. "In my time, we cooked healthy food." Tomi forced a smile. "I will adjust it." Then another comment. And another. Soon the gentle observations turned into loud criticisms. "The baby is crying because you don't know how to carry her properly. You sleep too much. You should wake earlier." The words came casually, almost like normal conversation. But each one landed like a tiny stone inside Tomi's chest. At first she tried to ignore them. After all, Mama Udo was older. Maybe this was simply how village mothers spoke. But the real change came quietly. Mama Udo stopped helping. One morning Tomi woke up early, expecting to see Mama Udo already in the kitchen as usual. Instead, the living room was silent. The kitchen was empty. The bedroom door was closed. It was almost 10 a.m. when Mama Udo finally appeared, stretching lazily as she walked into the living room. "Ah, Lagos bed is soft," she said with satisfaction. Tomi blinked. "You didn't sleep well." "I slept very well," Mama Udo replied, lowering herself comfortably onto the sofa. Then she picked up the television remote. From that day forward, a strange routine formed. Tomi woke early with the baby. Tomi cooked. Tomi cleaned. Tomi washed clothes. Mama Udo slept late, watched television, and occasionally commented on everything Tomi did. Sometimes she even called from the sofa, "My daughter, bring small tea," or "Is there no fruit in this house?" Tomi obeyed quietly. But what hurt her most wasn't the laziness. It was the criticism. One afternoon, Tomi sat on the bed feeding the baby. Mama Udo stood by the door watching. "You are holding the child wrongly," she said suddenly. Tomi adjusted the baby carefully. "Like this." Mama Udo clicked her tongue. "In our time, mothers were stronger." The words hung heavily in the room. Tomi said nothing. Later that evening, Emeka returned home from work. He greeted his mother warmly. "How was the day?" Mama Udo sighed dramatically. "My son, raising children today is not easy." Emeka frowned slightly. "Why?" Mama Udo lowered her voice. "Your wife is still learning." That night during dinner, Emeka suddenly turned to Tomi. "You should listen to my mother more." Tomi froze. "I do. She says you sleep too much during the day." The spoon in Tomi's hand stopped moving. "I wake at night with the baby," she said quietly. Emeka shrugged. "I'm just telling you what she said." Mama Udo remained silent, calmly eating her food. But a faint smile played at the corner of her lips. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Each evening, Mama Udo would quietly speak to her son. And each night, Emeka would repeat the complaints. "Why didn't you sweep the living room earlier?" "My mother says you're wasting food. She says you're not respectful enough." Each time, Tomi felt something inside her breaking. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to explain, but exhaustion silenced her. And grief still lived inside her heart like a shadow. So instead, she waited until everyone was asleep. Then she walked slowly to the bathroom. She locked the door. And she cried. The bathroom light was always dim, just bright enough to see her reflection in the mirror. Some nights she simply leaned against the sink, holding back sobs so no one would hear. Other nights she whispered softly to the empty room. If my mother was here, her voice would break. None of this would be happening. She imagined how her mother would have defended her. How she would have laughed away Mama Udo's harsh words. How she would have reminded Emeka to protect his wife. But those were only memories now. Reality was very different. Reality was living in a house where the person who once called her my daughter now treated her like a burden. The worst moment came one quiet evening. Tomi had just finished bathing the baby. She stepped into the hallway and heard voices coming from the living room. Mama Udo and Emeka were talking. Their voices were low. Tomi didn't mean to listen. But then she heard her name. "She sleeps too much," Mama Udo was saying. Emeka sighed. "She's tired, Mama." Mama Udo's voice sharpened. "My son, open your eyes." There was a short silence. Then she said something that made Tomi's stomach drop. "Your wife is controlling you." Tomi stood frozen in the hallway. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. Mama Udo continued speaking calmly. "If you don't correct her now, she will rule this house." Emeka didn't respond immediately. And in that silence, Tomi felt something cold settle deep inside her. For the first time since Mama Udo arrived in Lagos, Tomi realized something terrifying. This visit might not end peacefully. Time moves strangely when someone is counting the days to freedom. For Tomi, the calendar on the kitchen wall had become more than decoration. It had become hope. Every morning she crossed out a date with a red pen. One day closer to peace. 8 weeks. That was the agreement. The traditional length of a mugwo, when a mother or mother-in-law stays with a new mother to help care for the baby. And in Tomi's mind, those 8 weeks had stretched into something that felt like 8 years. Inside their apartment in Lagos, the tension had become something almost physical. Mama Udo had grown completely comfortable. Too comfortable. She no longer even pretended to help around the house. She woke late every morning, wrapped in one of Tomi's soft house robes she had taken without asking. She watched television for hours, commenting loudly on the behavior of the characters. "These modern women have no respect," she would say. Then she would glance pointedly toward the kitchen, where Tomi usually stood cooking with the baby tied carefully to her back. Sometimes Mama Udo called out instructions like she owned the house. "Tomi, reduce the pepper in the soup." Or "Why is the floor not shining?" The strange thing was that the longer she stayed, the bolder she became. She began opening Tomi's wardrobe freely. She wore Tomi's wrappers. She even told the house help once, "You don't need to clean today. I don't like the way you sweep." By evening the house was dusty. But Tomi said nothing. Her energy had long ago drained into silence. Only one thing kept her going. The calendar. 2 weeks left. Then 10 days. Then 5. And finally, one morning Tomi woke up and looked at the wall. Only one red square remained. Tomorrow would make 8 weeks. She stood there staring at the calendar for a long moment, barely able to believe it. Her nightmare was almost over. That evening she even hummed quietly while cooking dinner. The baby slept peacefully in the crib. For the first time in weeks, Tomi allowed herself to imagine what life would feel like when Mama Udo returned to the village. Quiet mornings. No criticism. No whispered conversations behind her back. Just peace. She decided to end the visit on a respectful note. The next morning, the final day, Tomi woke early and began preparing Mama Udo's favorite soup. The kitchen smelled rich and warm as the pot simmered. When Mama Udo finally came out of her bedroom near noon, Tomi greeted her politely. "Good afternoon, Mama." Mama Udo sat down at the dining table slowly. She sniffed the air. "You cooked my soup." "Yes," Tomi said with a careful smile. "I know you like it." Mama Udo nodded approvingly. They ate lunch quietly. Emika arrived home earlier than usual that day. Tomi noticed something strange after the meal. Mama Udo did not stand up to return to her room. Instead, she wiped her mouth calmly with a napkin and looked at both of them. "My children," she said. "Come and sit down." Something about her tone made Tomi's stomach tighten. She slowly sat down on the sofa beside Emika. Mama Udo leaned back comfortably in the armchair across from them. For a moment, she simply looked around the living room as if admiring the apartment. Then she spoke. "I have been thinking." Emika nodded politely. "About what, Mama?" Mama Udo clasped her hands together thoughtfully. "This baby is still very small." Tomi felt her heartbeat quicken. Mama Udo continued speaking slowly, carefully choosing her words. "And Lagos is not a safe place for small children." Tomi glanced at Emika. Something was wrong. Mama Udo took a small breath. "So I have decided something." She looked directly at Tomi. "I will not go back to the village." The room went completely silent. For a moment, Tomi thought she had heard wrong. Emika blinked in confusion. "Mama, what do you mean?" Mama Udo spoke calmly, as if explaining something obvious. "I will stay here until the child grows well." The words landed like a heavy stone in the center of the room. Tomi's hands began to tremble slightly. 8 weeks. The agreement had been 8 weeks. But Mama Udo continued speaking as if nothing unusual had been said. "Besides," she added lightly, "Lagos life is sweet." Emika looked uncomfortable. "But Mama, your house in the village is fine," she interrupted quickly. "The neighbors are watching it." She turned to Tomi again. "You are still learning how to be a mother. It is better if I stay." Tomi felt the air leave her lungs. She forced a small nod. But inside her chest, something collapsed. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Tomi walked slowly to the bathroom. She locked the door. Then she sank to the floor. Her tears came harder than ever before. For weeks she had held herself together. But now the truth was clear. The nightmare was not ending. It was only beginning. She covered her mouth to stop herself from sobbing loudly. "Mommy," she whispered through tears. This was not the plan. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror above the sink. A tired young woman with swollen eyes and a crying baby sleeping in the next room. She wiped her face slowly. Then she stood up. For the first time since Mama Udo arrived, something inside her hardened. Later that night, she sat beside Emeka on the bed. "We need to talk." Emeka looked up from his phone. "What is it?" Tomi took a deep breath. "Your mother cannot stay here permanently." Emeka sighed. "She's just trying to help." "She's not helping," Tomi said quietly. "She criticizes everything I do." Emeka looked uncomfortable. "She's old, Tomi. You know how mothers are." Tomi shook her head slowly. "No." She looked directly into his eyes. "If your mother does not go back to the village, I will take the baby and go to my father's house." The words hung heavily in the room. Emika stared at her in shock. "You wouldn't do that." Tomi's voice was calm. "I would." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. Emika was afraid of confronting his mother. And Mama Udo knew it. The next few days proved it. Mama Udo walked around the house like the owner of the property. She gave instructions to everyone. She complained louder, she criticized more freely, and Emeka remained silent. The house grew heavy with tension. One evening, after another exhausting day, Tomi sat alone in the bedroom rocking the baby. The room was dim and quiet. Her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen. The number made her freeze. Auntie Ngozi, her late mother's older sister. Tomi answered slowly. "Auntie?" Her aunt's voice was strong and direct. "My daughter, I heard everything." Tomi's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I spoke with your father." There was a short pause. Then her aunt said something that made Tomi sit up straight. "I am coming to Lagos tomorrow." Tomi blinked in surprise. "Auntie, why?" Her aunt's voice was calm, because some people need to be reminded of their place. The line went quiet, and for the first time in weeks, Tomi felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Morning arrived slowly over Lagos, but inside Tomi's apartment the air already felt heavy with anticipation. Tomi barely slept the night before. Her aunt was coming. The words still echoed in her mind. "I'm coming to Lagos tomorrow." She did not know exactly what would happen when Auntie Ngozi arrived. But one thing she knew for certain: her aunt was not a quiet woman. She was the type of woman whose presence filled a room the moment she entered it. And unlike Tomi, she was not afraid of confrontation. By mid-morning, the doorbell rang. Tomi hurried to the door, the baby resting gently against her shoulder. When she opened it, Auntie Ngozi stood there with a large handbag on one arm and a confident smile on her face. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a bright patterned wrapper that seemed to carry its own authority. "Tomi," she exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. "My daughter." For a moment, Tomi felt the warmth she had missed since her mother passed away. Auntie Ngozi pulled back and looked closely at her face. Her smile faded slightly. "You have been crying too much," she said quietly. Tomi looked down, embarrassed. "It's nothing, Auntie." Auntie Ngozi shook her head slowly. She stepped into the apartment. Within minutes, she noticed everything. The tension, the strange silence, the way Mama Udo sat comfortably in the living room watching television like the owner of the house. Mama Udo glanced up when Auntie Ngozi entered. The two older women stared at each other briefly. Tomi could almost feel the air between them tighten. Mama Udo forced a polite smile. "You are welcome." Auntie Ngozi nodded. "Thank you." But her eyes were already studying the room carefully. She greeted Emeka politely when he came out from the bedroom. She admired the baby. She even complimented the soup Tomi cooked for lunch. But beneath the polite words, something stronger was quietly building. Auntie Ngozi was observing, and what she saw did not please her. By evening, the small tensions began to surface. Mama Udo sat at the dining table criticizing the baby's bath. "You are using too much water," she said. "In our time, babies were not washed like this." Before Tomi could respond, Auntie Ngozi spoke calmly from the other side of the table. "The baby is clean. That is what matters." Mama Udo blinked. She was not used to being challenged. The next morning, the tension grew even stronger. Mama Udo complained loudly that the house help did not sweep properly. Auntie Ngozi responded without looking up from her tea. "Then perhaps you should sweep it yourself." Mama Udo turned slowly. "Excuse me." Auntie Ngozi sipped her tea calmly. "I said the broom is available." For the first time since arriving in Lagos, Mama Udo had no immediate reply. Over the next 3 days, the apartment became a battlefield of quiet confrontations. Mama Udo complained about food. Auntie Ngozi pointed out she was the one eating most of it. Mama Udo criticized Tomi's cooking. Auntie Ngozi praised it loudly. Mama Udo lectured about respect. Auntie Ngozi spoke about fairness. Each exchange chipped away at the invisible authority Mama Udo had built inside the house. But the final moment came on the fourth evening. The sun had already set when Auntie Ngozi called everyone into the living room. Her tone was calm but firm. "Let us talk." Emeka sat down slowly. Tomi remained quiet beside him. Mama Udo leaned back in her chair, clearly annoyed. "What is this meeting about?" Auntie Ngozi looked directly at her. "You came here for Omugwo." "Yes." "And Omugwo is 8 weeks." Mama Udo folded her arms. "This child still needs care." Auntie Ngozi nodded slowly. "The child has a mother." The room fell silent. Mama Udo's voice sharpened. "You are interfering in family matters." Auntie Ngozi's expression did not change. "I am protecting my sister's daughter." Mama Udo scoffed. "This is my son's house." "Yes," Auntie Ngozi replied calmly. "And that is his wife." Her voice grew slightly stronger. "She lost her mother when she needed her most." Tomi felt tears rising in her eyes. Auntie Ngozi continued. "She welcomed you here with respect." She leaned forward slightly. "But respect must go both ways." Mama Udo's face tightened. "I have done nothing wrong." Auntie Ngozi gave a small shrug. "That is good." She stood up slowly. "Then you will not mind if we call the family elders tomorrow and explain everything." Mama Udo's eyes widened slightly. Auntie Ngozi continued speaking calmly. "We will tell them how the 8-week visit became permanent. How the daughter-in-law cooks, cleans, and cries while the visitor watches television." The silence in the room grew heavy. Emeka shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Mama Udo looked uncertain. She understood what family elders meant. Public embarrassment, questions, judgment, and stories that would spread through the entire village. Auntie Ngozi adjusted her wrapper. So tomorrow morning we can begin making the calls. No one spoke. Mama Udo stood up slowly. Without another word, she walked toward the bedroom. That night, something surprising happened. For the first time since arriving in Lagos, Mama Udo began packing her bags. Quietly. Carefully. No announcements. No arguments. Just the slow sound of zippers closing in the night. The next morning, a taxi stopped outside the building. 4 large bags were carried downstairs. The same 4 bags that had arrived 8 weeks earlier. Mama Udo did not say much. She simply held the baby briefly. Then she handed the child back to Tomi. Her eyes avoided everyone's faces. Within minutes, the taxi door closed. The car pulled away slowly down the busy Lagos street. Inside the apartment, silence filled the rooms. Tomi stood near the balcony holding the baby. Emeka stood beside her. Neither of them spoke at first. Then suddenly Emeka laughed softly. Tomi looked at him. And for the first time in months, she laughed too. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous laugh. A deep, relieved laugh. The kind that comes when a heavy burden finally lifts. Behind them, Auntie Ngozi shook her head with satisfaction. Some people, she muttered, only understand strong language. Later that evening the house felt different. Peaceful. Quiet. The baby slept gently in her crib. Tomi sat beside the window watching the lights of Lagos glow in the distance. She held her daughter close and kissed her forehead. Then she whispered softly into the quiet room, "Mommy." Her voice trembled slightly. But this time the tears were not from pain. They were from relief. I survived. What did you get to learn from this story? Kindly drop your thoughts and questions below. Do well to hit the subscribe button to see more emotional and exciting stories like this on Afro Tales by Siri.